Hey readers! Welcome to iWizard, Nikki here. At the end of my last video, which I know was embarrassingly long ago, I included a mini TBR. And here's how it went. I reread Jane Eyre, followed by Jasper Fforde's The EYRE Affair as planned, but then my plans got a bit derailed because I had such a blast reading The EYRE Affair that I moved on to book 2 in the Thursday Next series, Lost in a Good Book. And then I had to read The Well of Lost Plots, and I couldn't just stop there, so I read Something Rotten, First Among Sequels, One of Our Thursdays is Missing, and The Woman Who Died a Lot. So I've read 8 books since the last video, and it was just such an absolute joy to read this series, and here are 9 reasons why you should read it too. Before I get into the 9 reasons to read the Thursday Next series, please remember to like this video, subscribe to iWizard, and tip your booktubers on Patreon if you enjoyed the content. Reason number 1. There's a literary detective protagonist. Our protagonist, Thursday Next, is a literary detective. For context, The EYRE Affair is a work of speculative fiction that's set in an alternate 1985, mostly in Swindon, England. And there are some geopolitical differences from our world. For example, Wales is the Socialist Republic of Wales. The Crimean War, which in reality ended in 1856, is still ongoing in this version of 1985. Thursday Next is a veteran. She served as an officer in the war. And her current job is as a special operative working for Spec Ops 27, the Literatech division. Literature is so important in this world that there are literary detectives posted in major cities to identify forgeries and track down the thieves of valuable manuscripts. And I think Thursday is a likable character. She's strong, competent, energetic, but she doesn't take herself too seriously. She's like kind of approaching an Austin Powers type Jane Bond.
Oh, behave. Yeah, baby.
With a Dr. Emmett Brown-esque uncle named Mycroft who invents wacky gadgets. Her animal companion is a resurrected dodo named Pickwick who doesn't have wings. She's a bit dumb but super cute. And Thursday also moonlights as a vampire hunter with her pal Spike Stoker of Spec Ops 17, werewolf and vampire disposal operations. And Thursday's narrative is not always trustworthy for very specific reasons that unfold with many of the latter books. And on a more personal note, like maybe I love the series so much because this was a really good time for me to read it. I'm in a similar life stage as Thursday for the first half of the series, mid-30s, and she's also pregnant with a boy throughout a couple of the books. And let me just say this, Jasper Fforde. Thursday drinks way too much coffee for a pregnant lady. There's no way every time someone offers her a cup that it's decaf. So back to a little bit about the first book. Her assigned literary detective case at the beginning of the first novel is to track down the original Martin Chuzzlewit manuscript by Charles Dickens, which has been stolen without a trace of evidence. The major issue here being that if any alteration is made to the original manuscript, it changes all editions of the book. So this world is magical, and we eventually learn that literary characters are real. Reason number 2. Fforde makes the remarkable mundane. From page 1, you are thrown into this familiar yet extraordinary world. To give you a taste, I'm going to read you the first little bit of chapter 1. And Get acquainted with it because you'll be reading this passage at least 3 times in the series. Here it goes. My father had a face that could stop a clock. I don't mean that he was ugly or anything. It was a phrase the chronoguard used to describe someone who had the power to reduce time to an ultra-slow trickle. So here, time travel is real and falls within the domain of Spec Ops 12, the Office for Special Temporal Stability, also known as the Chronoguard. As I mentioned earlier, the resurrection of extinct species is possible with at-home gene sequencing kits, making the most popular pet a dodo, like Thursday's Pickwick. There are mammoths running about, Neanderthals are back, and there's illegal chimeras on the loose from at-home science experiments gone awry. It's the job of Spec Ops 13, the genetic detectives, to eradicate illegal re-engineered species and chimeras. In this world, chimeras are spliced together hybrids of any combination of different species. We even encounter Shakespeare clones at one point. And travel is way cooler in this world as well. There are airships instead of airplanes, which I imagine are like zeppelins, and the Gravitube, a new form of mass transit that shoots its riders through the center of Earth so you could travel from, say, New York to Tokyo in a couple of hours, somehow without melting. And while all this sounds wild, the descriptions are not over the top, and Thursday interacts with these oddities in the same way we would operate a toaster. For example, her father randomly freezes time and appears out of nowhere, well, out of another time, to only Thursday quite often within the series with a "Hello, sweet pea," and she always responds as though she were simply answering the phone. "Oh, hi, Dad." So, yes, mundane. And this might not be related, but I'm going to force it to be anyway. Jasper Fforde worked in the camera and electrical department on a bunch of movies, including Quills, which I actually hadn't heard of and just watched the other night. It's about the Marquis de Sade. He also worked on Entrapment, The Mask of Zorro, The Saint, Goldeneye, and The Trial. His role was as the focus puller, so he had to manually adjust the camera focus to fit the scene. And here's my force here. I do think the skill translates to Jasper Fforde's writing. He crafts vibrant yet lively scenes, giving you precisely the detail you need without overdoing the descriptions. Great focus. Reason number 3, the plot is tight. This is definitely not the kind of series where you're just aimlessly following the protagonist around, exploring the world. There's very little of that. Each plot thread serves a purpose and usually comes back together later on in the book or later in the series. There's never a dull moment, and it's crammed with action, witty banter, and marvelous discoveries. But it never feels like action for action's sake, because that can feel old and tired pretty quickly. And it's not just skin and bones either. The epigraphs at the start of each chapter enrich the world and make it feel more fleshed out. The writing is always energetic, and these are those special sorts of books where reading them never feels draining. And I found myself always looking forward to jumping back in. No slogs here. Reason number 4. These books are filled with quirky and often cheeky fun. I mentioned in my last video that my friend Brittany sent me the EYRE Affair to read. She sent me a note along with it, writing that there are so many different types of good books. Books that inspire, books with prose like poetry, books that transport you to distant worlds. This series does that, but it is also just fun. These books are an absolute joy to read, and they're funny, very much British humor, evoking Monty Python at times. Here's an example from book 4, Something Rotten. There's a character, Saint Zivilkix, spelled Zvlkx, so yes, try to pronounce it without listening to the audiobook. A monk who's time traveled from the 13th century to orate a revealment, and another character has to translate his Middle English, okay, and the monk in his Middle English would plainly say, Has the ale improved since I've been away? Hubba hubba. Who's the moppet in the tight blouse? And someone would ask, what did he say? And the translator would respond, he said just then that he is tired after his journey and wants only world peace, bridges between nations, and a good home for orphans, kittens, and puppies. So there's a lot of that type of translating from Middle English, which is actually just crude English, to something that's more appropriate to have been said by a monk. And anyway, the New York Times Book Review blurb on the back of this edition of the EYRE Affair captured this sentiment really well. I'm going to quote from it. Fforde delivers almost every sentence with a sly wink, and he's got an easy way with wordplay, trivia, and inside jokes. Fforde's verve is rarely less than infectious. And this series feels to me like a combination of so many other books and series that I love, like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Alice in Wonderland, The Neverending Story, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I also love the goofy James Bond style names for their characters. There's Felix Tabula Rasa, who can't remember beyond a week ago. Tabula Rasa is blank slate in Latin. There's Braxton Hicks. There's Jack Shit spelled Schitt, Acheron Hades, Acheron like the river of the underworld. He's a villain, believe it or not. There's Spike Stoker, the vampire hunter, and Red Herring, who may or may not be a red herring, to name a few. And another scene that I found particularly amusing came at the beginning of book 2, Lost in a Good Book. It really served as the recap to book 1, and it's no easy feat to do a recap well without it feeling like a chore to those binge readers like me. The way Fforde did it is he had Thursday serve as a TV talk show guest on the Adrian Lush show. And now that I've read the latter books, I'm making a few more connections. So for so many reasons, these books are totally rereadable for the joy of reading them and also all the Easter eggs that at least give the impression that Jasper Fforde had a plan for the series, like some kind of outline for the whole thing in advance. Anyway, Thursday is being interviewed about a sensitive subject. That subject being what went down with Jane Eyre and Acheron Hades in book 1. This interview is going to be aired on television, but the live interview itself is closed off to the public, and the audience is instead made up of a bunch of special interest groups. Representatives from special interest groups, like from government entities and the Goliath Corporation, which is the uber conglomerate of that world, and also the Toast Marketing Board. Yeah, there are ads for Toast in this world, and they're each butting in and censoring Thursday's responses to the point that the entire interview that airs to the public about the EYRE Affair is entirely comprised of Thursday discussing her pet dodo, Pickwick. And while a lot of this might sound silly, the series is not without its heavier moments, and I did cry a couple of times. Yes, I'm also pregnant, so everything makes me cry, but my most memorable cry fest happened at the end of books 2 and 4. I honestly ugly cried at the end of book 4, Something Rotten. So if you're looking to get your heartstrings tugged a little bit, maybe pick up the series. It doesn't have a lot of that, but it does have some, and a lot of funny. Reason number 5, you're a book lover. This is the most obvious and compelling reason to read the series. If you love to read and have a general knowledge of mostly classic works, then it'll be lots of fun for you to dip into this world. And you don't need to have detailed recall of hundreds of classic books. Mostly knowing the gist of the plot and having the ability to recognize a few of the main characters will enrich this experience for you. And I did reread Jane Eyre to prep for reading the EYRE Affair. I had been planning to go through to pick up all the breadcrumbs and conduct a detailed analysis of the two works. And that didn't happen because you're not expected to be a Jane Eyre scholar to read the EYRE Affair, which makes sense for appealing to a broader readership. And The EYRE Affair was a New York Times bestseller. And while it wasn't necessary for me to reread Jane Eyre in preparation, it is important that you know how Jane Eyre ends before picking up The EYRE Affair, or you'll lose out on a major plot line. And because this book is called The EYRE Affair, I was really surprised that it did not entirely revolve around Jane Eyre. Jane only enters into the latter half of the book. And what's really fun is that there are mechanisms for book characters in this world to escape into this world's real world and vice versa. Thursday finds herself having to save Jane Eyre from a kidnapping and ultimately has to physically transport herself into its pages to do so. And another fun aspect of the series is that Thursday's actions alter storylines so that they end up matching the works as we've read them, such as the ending to Jane Eyre. And there's a certain scene in Great Expectations that's impacted by Book 2, Lost in a Good Book. As the series progresses, Thursday spends more time in the book world, where the cat formerly known as Cheshire is the librarian. It's very much like Alice in Wonderland in the book world. Thursday has to defend her actions during her time in Jane Eyre within the pages of Kafka's The Trial. So she actually has to defend herself in a Kafka-esque trial. Norland Park from Sense and Sensibility serves as the Jurisfiction headquarters. Jurisfiction is the policing agency in the book world. There's a Wuthering Heights Rage Against Heathcliff group to let the characters vent, or else the book will keep becoming more and more unstable, leading to murders, and essentially like everything will go up in flames. The group is run by Miss Havisham from Great Expectations, who's also a top jurisfiction agent who wields guns and drives race cars. And Heathcliff is a thorn in everyone's side in the book world and is constantly under protection due to many assassination attempts against him. He left the book world for the real world for some time, where he resided as the actor Buck Stallion. We get the three witches from Macbeth. They go around door to door as solicitors selling insurance and loans while occasionally giving murky prophecies. There's a council of genres that meets periodically to recategorize books. For example, 1984 has to be recategorized as nonfiction within this book world agency. Thomas Hardy novels were once comedies, but the funny was stolen from them, so that's why they're so dry and depressing. The references go on and on. It also helps if you're a grammar nerd and know a bit about literary criticism, though none of this is necessary to enjoy the series. Reason number 6. This series is an escape to stranger worlds. If you're looking to get absorbed in a series that will truly remove you and distract you from reality while also having a great time, I'd recommend picking this up ASAP. And I will warn that each novel gets progressively more absurd, and you'll enjoy these books most if you're just along for the ride. There are some loose rules to the magic in this series and some bizarre scientific explanations for it, but it does not by any means fall under the category of a hard magic system or hard science fiction. I found it best to just sit back and be delighted by Fforde's imagination. And if absurdity is a problem for you in books, this might not be the series for you. And you will encounter some genuine strangeness, I promise. And you'll end up in some truly unexpected places, like trapped within a washing machine manual or within an ethics lecture. We're also introduced to an array of creatures: extinct creatures, fantastical creatures, and newly imagined creatures. Some of my favorite newly imagined creatures were the Gramocytes. I envisioned them as looking similar to the Mind Box from Empire Strikes Back.
It's all right. It's all right. Yeah, what I thought. Minoc.
And there are different types of Gramocytes, such as ejectivores, verbosoids, nounfish, and converbulators that feed on different forms of grammar. For example, if a book has bland descriptions, that's not just the writer. That is because it has likely been fed on by an ejectivore or ejectivores. A significant portion of the science in these books does revolve around entropy. So the second law of thermodynamics, the tendency for disorder to increase in a closed system. Like if you just leave your room be, it'll naturally get messier and messier and messier. It won't just spontaneously clean itself. It'll only organize itself once you have put energy into the system to do so. And one of my favorite devices in this series is the entropy meter, which is really just various dried beans. I think they were dried beans, if I'm remembering correctly, shaken up in a jar. And Thursday carries this jar around in book 2. And if the beans begin to stratify and form organized layers, this would indicate that entropy has been artificially decreased, since the beans are unlikely to spontaneously organize themselves naturally. And this corresponds to an increase in coincidences, which usually means that something bad is about to happen. So the entropy meter is a warning system for Thursday. Also in this series, croquet is a major contact sport that's popularity seems to be on par with football in our world. And the croquet field is complete with obstacles like shrubbery and picnickers. And reason number 7. This series contains a meta-narrative that's actually done quite well. By the time we get to book 5 in the series, Thursday's adventures from books 1 to 4 have been published within the series itself. So there exists a fictional version of Thursday in the book world. And my interpretation is that the entire time we're reading these books is that we're interacting with the final revised form of them from the book world that have been influenced from the series itself. So ultimately, we're not getting the real story of what truly transpired. So we're reading a book within a book that's aware that it's a book. And within the book world, we also learn how books were actually written, and it's not how you would think, and the author has very little to do with it. And the characters have to be constantly in their roles, like acting out their roles. And if the book is popular, okay, because they only have to do this as the book is being read. And this is especially difficult if a character is first person, because all their thoughts are read. And there's some discourse within the series over freedom of third-person characters versus that of first-person characters, because third-person characters are free to think their own thoughts, whereas the first-person characters have to always be in their role. On top of that, the characters are also trying to find ways to maintain popularity with the readers so their books don't go out of print, at which point the characters are at risk of getting repurposed for another work, or at worst, the entire book being decommissioned. In book 3, The Well of Lost Plots, we also learn about the early life stages of the characters. They begin as generics and have to attend a special academy to train to become characters, and their bodies and personalities morph accordingly. And naturally, the characters become more human over time, which can make them go mad or get them expelled from their book. So another generic then has to train and take over their role. And the structure of the book world also prompts this question. Could an author be kept alive within one of their books? And in this series, Wordsworth had himself retired to the poem Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, so he's still existing within that poem. However, this was not the case for Jules Verne, as Captain Nemo mentions that he misses his old friend who's long since died. The characters then can live essentially forever, but it's a much more repetitive life. And speaking of repetition, the Thursday Next series is certainly not cookie cutter. And that is reason number 8 to read the series. It's not cookie cutter. And by this, I mean not only is the series itself unique, but each novel in it differs from the others. It's not formulaic at all. The first novel, The EYRE Affair, is more of a detective novel. And the second, Lost in a Good Book, is more like Alice in Wonderland. And Thursday is also trying to prevent an apocalypse in a low-key sort of Buffy-like way.
If the apocalypse comes, beat me.
There are some Doctor Who qualities to it as well. The third, The Well of Lost Plots, is even more surreal and has aspects of Pleasantville combined with a psychological thriller. And it's also a labyrinth tale complete with Minotaur. And in the fourth, Something Rotten is like a political thriller with some sci-fi elements combined with an underdog sports story. Also, we get the Shakespeare clones in this one, and Hamlet is at risk of merging with the Merry Wives of Windsor, and he's actually a pretty important character in the book. The fifth, First Among Sequels, takes place 14 years after book 4, and in many ways is a reprise of book 2, except the apprentice has become the master and has to train herself. Well, different versions of herself, her book selves. Things get weird. And Thursday has to track down a book character serial killer. In some ways, it evokes Neverending Story, where there's literally a nothing surrounding the book world. Remember, Thursday can physically travel into books. There's also a cheese mafia and some issues with time travel that's dependent upon the recipe for unscrambled eggs. So it's not really at all like book 2. The sixth, one of our Thursdays is missing, is a mystery with some sci-fi and psychological mayhem, as it takes place from the perspective of a Thursday. And the question is it the real Thursday or a fictional Thursday? And the seventh, the woman who died a lot, is like 24, but over the course of a few days with a bunch of psych games thrown in and more trippy. If I had to rank them, I'd say I liked the first book best, The EYRE Affair, followed by the fourth, Something Rotten, and the second, Lost in a Good Book. I think my top 3 were pretty easy for me to order. Then in my notes, I have the fifth book, First Among Sequels, listed in my number 4 slot. But for whatever reason, thinking back, that book really stuck with me the least in the series. So I think I'm just going to bump The Well of Lost Plots into my number 4 slot and place First Among Sequels as fifth. Then I'd rank the seventh book, The Woman Who Died a Lot, in 6th place. And One of Our Thursdays is Missing in last. So while each differs, I'd say only the first book, The EYRE Affair, can act as a standalone. Books 2 to 4 have a continuous storyline, and book 4 is another natural conclusion or stopping point. Book 3 disappointed me slightly at the time of reading it because it served as an intermission to the main story, but between books 2 and 4. But once again, thinking back about it, there was really a lot of good stuff in there. The second half of the series, beginning with book 5, takes place 14 years after the events of book 4. Book 6, similar to book 3, felt like an intermission. And book 7 was just mostly classic Thursday Next stuff. And coming back around to the topic of the books not being cookie cutter, while there are epigraphs at the start of each chapter, the style and sources of those even change within each book. Most come from book excerpts and news clippings, but in book 5, for example, which is years removed from book 4, they serve to remind the reader what happened earlier in the series. And the last reason, the 9th reason to read the Thursday Next series is that now is the time. I have already said this once, but I'll say it again. Now is the best time to read this series. Not only because it makes for a blissful escape, but after a 13-year hiatus, the final installment in the Thursday Next series, Dark Reading Matter, is set to be released soon. So I guess it's really a 14-year hiatus because it's not as soon as I had hoped or thought, because I went and I looked back at the release date and I could have sworn it had said that it was going to be released November 2025. But since I last checked, the date has changed to September 2026. Either way, Get to it. You have 7 books to read before Dark Reading Matter is released. And if you still want more afterward, or if you need more of this world before Book 8's release, there's the 2-book Nursery Crimes spin-off series that was published after Something Rotten. The Nursery Crimes series is from the perspective of Inspector Jack Spratt from The Well of Lost Plots, and is comprised of The Big Over Easy and The Fourth Bear. Okay, that was a lot, and perhaps a bit confusing, but I hope that you're intrigued and experience the fun of the Thursday Next series yourself. And until next time, happy reading. Bye.